JudgeMagistR there was.
Greetings everyone, this is JudgeMagistR, and for today's Speedrun 101 episode I'm going to be focusing on Dreki, the Rune Serpent. Dreki is one of the 3 flying bosses in this game, and much like Thrall, it has been giving a formidable challenge to both myself and speedrunners. And hopefully in this guide it makes it easier to understand how to fight him, and even more so to improve your times during your speedrun attempts. So this is the table of content, other things I'll be going through this video, and without any further delays, let's just jump straight into it. So just like I did with the previous ones, we're gonna be starting with the intentional ways of climbing Dreki. The first intentional method is hitting 3 switches to activate a glider boost in the middle of the arena. So these switches can be found on pillars hidden behind ice walls, and only one of them is fully covered in ice. So the ideal here is to bring your character near the pillar that's fully covered in ice, and then Dreki will shoot some fireballs at you, so if you're hiding behind the pillars, that will basically destroy the walls of ice that's covering the switches. Another fun fact is that you can use the soul arrow to destroy the walls of ice covering the pillars as well. That could be a really decent backup strategy. Let's say Dreki is taking too long to shoot, or maybe you haven't reached the pillars in time, the Dreki shot the fireballs at you. Once it's done, you either climb or grapple at the platform in the middle. Once you reach this platform in the middle, you can jump and use your glider to reach higher heights. Once you're high enough, you can either manually land on Dreki or grapple in one of the hook spots that Dreki has. On another note, Dreki has 4 hook spots and they're gonna be essential for his move traversal on the boss. I'll discuss that later in the video. As for the second method, you'll be basically climbing on the tall mountains towards the big spiral symbols. The reason why I believe this is also an intentional method is due to some hook spots that can be found on those mountains. And since Dreki flies almost in circles to that arena, eventually there will be a time where Dreki will reach close to these mountains. You can either land or grapple at one of the hook spots, which grappling in one of the hook spots is a more consistent way for the second method. And now that we're done with the intentional ways of climbing, let's go with the shaking variations that Dreki has in their respective hitboxes. And thankfully, there isn't much variations, however all of them can potentially affect Dreki's body entirely. The first shake would be the fast roll shake. Dreki will roll at high speed once you ring any of the bells. Sometimes he does the same shake at his own volition. Since the spin is too fast, he affects his entire body, but there are situations that he only affects his lower half of his body. The second shaking variation is a slower roll. Dreki will slowly spin his entire body in order to make you fall. This one is triggered by his own volition. The hitbox for that one may vary in the results, but mostly affects his lower half of his body, once your character has the legs hanging in the air. The third and last shaking variation will be Dreki's scream. Its loud and powerful roar will affect his body entirely, shaking you off for a few frames. So now that we got those out of the way, let's talk about these move traversals that you can make. Before getting into that, you first must know a way to reach Dreki fast enough. What you gotta do is use a grappling hook more and using a glider much less. Another thing that you must know, those switches can be activated with a grappling hook, a melee weapon, or an arrow, and this is when we use bow and arrow for speedrunning. Lucky for us though, there's a tier 2 bow and some arrows right before you trigger Dreki. It can be found behind this buried rune ring right here. Now that you got all set up, let's proceed and see how this goes in motion. As I previously suggested, we're gonna be jumping down without using our glider as much. So let me pause it here. So the first reason I'm using the glider here is pretty much to avoid fall damage, but I'm also using to avoid the sort of specific upper level section of the arena. So we need to reach the lowest as possible, right? So I'm just using the glider for that. I'm also using the character's air control to go towards the left, because I don't want to go to that ring, and you should not do that either. So that's when we simply just grapple ourselves on the ground to ground, just spamming the usage of the grappling hook until we reach our destination. I'm just using the glider to avoid fall damage, and I'm just using the character's air control and the game's wind to take me a bit further, and then I use the grapple again. And that's when Dreki is gonna shoot the first set of fireballs, and as you can notice, I hit myself behind the ice walls, so that made Dreki strike the ice walls instead of myself, therefore avoiding the fireballs. And let me pause it here to try to explain it. So that's when my method differs from tactics, and I'm gonna try to go and tell the pros and cons of each method. So for my method, as you can see, instead of going to the left like tactic does, I just go a little more straight. trying to reach the pillar that's covered in ice, which is the third pillar. And there you go, I'm already there. And that's when Dreki gonna shoot the second set of fireballs at you, and that's a good thing, because I'm already standing at the pillar that's covered in ice. Which I would say is a really good benefit from this method specifically, because if you reach fast enough, destroying this pillar will always be consistent on your end. But of course there is a problem. What about the pillar on the west? And that's when, to make it fast enough, I will use the bow and arrow to strike from the pillar that's covered in ice all the way to the west. The downside from this method is that you will need to practice your aiming skills, and for that it may be a little inconsistent, but gladly, like I said, there's a tier 2 bow right before you trigger the fight, and using a tier 2 bow it's much more consistent than using a default bow, only losing to the soul bow. Here's a footage of mine doing the tactics approach. To be honest, it's just as good as mine, but there are different concerns. And so the timer suggests that we have 50 seconds to reach to the pillar that's covered in ice. But let's say if you don't reach it during those 50 seconds, that means that you're gonna miss it, you're gonna have to wait for Dreki's cooldown. So that basically means the tactics method has to be done without any mistakes. You need to master the aiming on grappling hook and properly use your slow motion techniques, and also quite literally pray for the gods to not have that bad RNG on the wind physics. This may potentially make your way to the pillar that's covered in ice much slower, and your grappling options is a little more limited since there's a bunch of water in your way and you can't exactly grapple those. So right, we can finally get to the interesting part of the run, which is climbing Dreki and saving enough time to do so. And this cutscene in specific is happening in real time. What that basically means is that if you don't skip the cutscene, Dreki is gonna appear in a different direction than skipping a cutscene, right? It's gonna be two different results. You don't have to worry much about skipping or not, because both results will still be somewhat the same. The reason for this is that the timer keeps running regardless. It's not exactly like you see in Shadow Colossus where it has a cutscene break and the timer just, pauses during the cutscenes. If you don't skip the cutscene or take a little longer to skip the cutscene, that will basically mean that Dreki is gonna be a little closer to you. A really good way to tell that he's close to you, it's when he's about to get all glowy and then he spins around and then he shoots the set of fireballs at you once again. That basically tells you that he's like within the range that you can use a glider and reach to him much faster. Unfortunately though, this is more like a muscle memory reaction. It's a little hard to teach, but if you keep those two things in mind, I believe this might help you a lot on landing on Dreki much easier. After you're done with the first sigil, or even each sigil for that matter, he often does like a slower roll. You need to avoid losing your time to the slower roll, so basically what I did is let myself go in the middle of the faster spin for the third and last time you ring the bell on the first sigil, and then I used the air control to reach for the second bell sigil. But there's a catch here. I am also using the camera positioning to enhance my air control. Apparently the camera in this game may even mess up or enhance your air control skills, and I managed to record multiple footages showing exactly what I mean by this. As you can see, some of the attempts I just really fly away to the second sigil much faster, while the other ones I just struggle to reach the second sigil, but either one of them works pretty well, and it's something that I really highly recommend you to practice on echo mode. This is gonna be important for the entirety of this run. So once you master your air controlling skills, that means that you're gonna reach the Dreki second sigil either fast or just a bit slow, and depending on your pace, Dreki may have different reactions as you're reaching the second sigil, but both of them can still result in the same outcome regardless. So let's say if you reach the sigil really fast, so if you ring the bell as soon as you reach it, it may have a chance that he's gonna do a fast spin one more time, but since you've reached fast enough on the second sigil, that means that it's not exactly much of a time loss. And that this is totally RNG, this is not exactly guaranteed to happen, but it has happened to me quite a lot, and unfortunately it kind of delays my run, at least for the world record pace, and it is annoying, so I decided to come up with another solution. if you reach a little too slow, you can do the same thing, as soon as you reach it, you can also ring the bell, but here's the different thing that's gonna happen. So I would say for the 90% of the time, Dreki will have a scripted reaction of doing a slower roll, and since I'm anticipating for that, I just wait. So once I hear Dreki screaming, that means that he's gonna do his lower spin, and that allows me to ring the bell twice before I get shaken off. And the interesting thing about that is that he often spins to the same side, which always allows me to ring the bell twice before getting shaken off. And if you know precisely the time that he's gonna spin, that could potentially allow you to one-cycle this boss, and which finally gets me to the next topic. Could you, or can you, one-cycle Dreki? And the short answer for this is that yes, you can, but to go a little more in depth, there are a bit of rules that you have pretty much to delay some of your actions. Well, not only that, you also would have to rely on some of the RNG shaking variations that Dreki may have for the one cycle to work. So with that said, the one cycle technique won't really be used here for the most optimal time, but more as a backup strategy to save time if you messed up. So just like the previous gods or giants, however you may refer them as, we will be using their shaking variations to advantage to be able to ring the bell twice before getting shaken off. And as for Dreki has two shaking variations that can be able to ring the bell twice. The first one, as you previously saw, is gonna be the slower roll. If he spins in a favorable direction, that means that you're gonna be able to ring the bell twice before getting shaken off. Now, if he spins in a non-favorable direction, that means that you will be able only to ring the bell once after he shakes you off. Now the slower roll may be random at times, but it does have a little consistency, and the consistency often comes when you ring the bell once and then he does this faster roll, and then he does the powerful roar, and after that it comes the follow-up with a slower roll. As for the direction he spins on, that's entirely an RNG reaction. I don't think it's something that you can control. That unfortunately only relies on your luck, and if you're not lucky, then it is what it is. And the second shaking variation will be Dreki's powerful roar. But this one is actually quite tricky to master, mind you, because this powerful roar, it's pretty random at times and it's really hard to guess when it's coming. It doesn't really have a consistent behavior that which Dreki may do that. However, there are a few sound or visual cues that allows you to guess when that's coming. The sound cue will be pretty much the scream. And if you ring the bell just in the time when he screams, you're gonna be able to bypass the shaking effect that he causes you. And the second will be the visual cue. He often gets glowy and he tilts a little to the side, and that allows you to pretty much do the same thing. So always keep your ears and eyes sharp for this specific detail, because that will most definitely help increase consistency on making this half cycle technique. And now that you have all this knowledge on the half cycle technique, we can finally proceed to my personal struggle, the biggest challenge I ever had with this game, and it's definitely the tail sigil from Dreki. So this is basically a smooth traversal guide for the last 2 sigils remaining, and I'll give you some alternatives that what can be done depending on your situation running this boss. So as you can see, every time I hit the aggro phase, a cutscene will play, and once the cutscene is done, I pretty much just use my glider, and I'm just get myself floating a little bit in the air, and that's when I use my grappling hook, launching myself to one of the hook spots. This may be a little advanced, but it really isn't. It is honestly very consistent if you know what you're doing right, just being aware of it. So once you grapple yourself to the first hook spot, Dreki will scream twice before you reach the third sigil. If you manage to reach the third sigil before he screams for a second time, that will basically allow you to do the half cycle technique. If you don't manage to reach it before the second scream, don't you worry, those are just world record pace concerns, and all you can do is simply just ring the bell casually until it wears off. So once you're done in the third sigil, that's when you're finally gonna be able to reach the tail sigil, and at least I found about 3 to 4 alternatives you could make to reach the tail sigil fast enough. However, all of them has some sort of inconsistency between them, and as I roll the footage, I'll try to explain the inconsistencies between each method, as well the pros and cons. So as for the first method, I don't really have many complaints about it. The only single complaint I may have is that for most of the time, I believe every time you reach that hook spot right there, Dreki will scream. That will basically tilt his body a little to the side, and that's when comes the jankiness to the game, and the jankiness unfortunately plays a huge part on the pace of the run. As you can see, your character can get a little bit stuck on that position, which it could be definitely annoying for some players. So as for the second method, it consists of grappling yourself on the hook spot from the tail, which in theory makes the closest one to the tail sigil. The only problem with this hook spot is that you are extremely dependent on Dreki's actions, which you may have to wait for Dreki to do his lower roll or a faster one, because that's pretty much the only way I can think of that you can get to the other side smooth enough. As you may see, this method seems a little inconsistent as well, quite inconvenient at that, but I may assure you that it can be just as fast as the first method potentially, because like I said, it is still the nearest hook spot to the tail sigil. Wow, that was much longer than what I expected to be. However, this is everything you need to know for your speedrun practice on Dreki. If you happen still to have any questions or doubts regarding the speedrun process of this boss, please let me know in the comments or join our speedrunning server from Pray for the Gods on Discord. I hope everyone is having a great day, and I see you in the next Speedrun 101 episode.